Do you have freedom? In essence, are you allowed to be you? Do you have the quality or state of being free? The power to do as one pleases, freedom from physical restraint, freedom from arbitrary or despotic control, the power of choice? Are you sovereign? That is the Liberty Mindset. Let us foster our curiosity and seek the truth. And we are live, and welcome to the Liberty Mindset. And I seem to I'm not sure I'm going to hear anybody. Okay. Gotta love the flip picture on my screen. It's all flipped and sideways and crazy, and it really drives me nuts. However, having said that, welcome to the Liberty Mindset. Today is Donald Trump Derangement Day, and everybody's been crazy about the news of Mr. Trump turning himself in. Okay, well, that's done. And, my thing is, it's not a big deal, and it's, what's next? It's just going to be the next party. Nothing to see here, just keep moving on. This episode is talking about the Articles of Confederation versus the U.S. Constitution, and this all came about way back when I tweeted something. I was tweeting something about the Constitution, and somebody came back with this simple equation: Articles greater than Constitution. And, of course, being me, I had to set myself down a little tiny rabbit. Well, it wasn't actually a little tiny rabbit hole. It took about 4 days of research to find out information that I wanted to find out. And it was an interesting view. In school, I grew up in the 70s, and in school, they always said the articles were weak, and they abolished them after a few years. And that was like the extent of the history. There's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot of reasons that they abolished it. Now, whether those are valid reasons or not, that is up for discussion, without question. But let me read for you a little bit of my research. Articles of Confederation, key points: there is no judiciary or executive branch. There is no judicial branch. Some, of course, would cheer this limitation given our current governmental oppression. I could see where this would be the case. We essentially had only the Senate, a single representative body, a monocameral, if you were 2 to 7 representatives from each state. They were not paid, and they were limited to a single 3-year term in any 6-year time period. So they could only take one term, then they had to take 3 years off. Okay, not bad. One thing that we don't seem to realize is that each individual representative did not have a vote. Each delegation had a vote. So New York with 7 delegates would have the same vote as Massachusetts with 4, and say with Georgia with 2. And actually, Georgia probably had more like 4 or 5. I didn't think to research this. Now I'm going to have to go down another rabbit hole. But so each delegation would have 1 vote. So there were a total of 13 votes. And that is what all the decisions were made of. The whole purpose was in mutual defense. Each state will defend its neighbors. It was demonstrated as truly untenable during the Revolutionary War. There were times when states said, yeah, we're not going to send anybody. We don't have the money. We're not going to bother. We pretty much lost during the Revolutionary War. During this period, we lost pretty much every war until the French suddenly decided to join our side. And then it is almost as much as Great Britain stopped supplying us because they were fighting the French in their other wars. We didn't win through any brilliant strategies. Yeah, Washington, I think, did a good job with what he had. He was just outnumbered, outgunned, outmonetized. But then Great Britain started being more worried of their then mortal enemy, Louis XVI. Of course, British then again tried to take us back in 1812, but that's another show. The states may not take treaties. Only Congress can make treaties between states and international nations and between the states, but states could not make treaties with each other. There was that one limit on their individuality and their sovereignty. Also, war can only be declared by Congress. Each state must also provide militias. It's not an option because Congress has no power over the states. Many of the states just chose not to, as I mentioned before. Extradition is codified. Treason, high crimes, and felony crimes. One state can say, we want your criminal. There is no wiggle room. I know. Like Trump, if they tried to extradite him. Now, Trump voluntarily went to New York and did his thing. But I don't know if I would have been a little curious to see if DeSantis could have defended not extraditing him based on looking at the Constitution. It was just as there are no options. We have the extradition papers. You will extradite. So I don't know if there's have any choice there. You were free to move about the country. It's not specified otherwise, as long as you weren't a criminal or a felon or vagabond or poor. You were free to move about the country. Those are specifics in there that you cannot if you're poor or vagabond. You can't change it. You needed a unanimous vote of all 13 colonies or however many colonies ended up being in that realm to make any changes at all to the documentation of the Articles of Confederation. Now, I don't have a problem with making it really hard to change at all because you don't want things to change often and frequently. You want to take it, we want the change to be sure. Now, I'm more of a 3/3, 2/3, 3/4. Our current situation is 3/4 of the state must recognize it before it's changed, and I'm okay with that. Here in Oregon, whenever we have a new state ballot initiative, it is 50% plus one vote. The United States only extends, but there's that. So we have, and whatever passed for president was really just whoever the chairperson was of the assembly, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. Intellectual property wasn't protected. Slavery was not eliminated or even. The only stipulation towards slavery in this was that new states could not be slave states. The existing states that were slave states would continue to be so. And again, as mentioned, it was exceedingly weak. Now, exceedingly weak's not bad. Okay, don't get me wrong. Exceedingly weak is not bad. However, it was so weak that this did cause problems because there was no place for states. If they had disputes, they literally would, the militias would start forming, and there was many risks of war in between the two countries, in between the two states because of disputes. And that's why the Articles of Confederation were written, but they weren't strong enough in order to solve that problem. It's broken up into articles just like the Constitution. The first article just says it's going to be called the United States of America. Each state will retain its sovereign freedom and independence in every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this Confederation expressly delegated to the United States, similar to our 9th and 10th Amendments in the current Constitution. Just to note, in order for the Constitution to pass, those had to be promised to the states. Article 3 said the states hereby certify into a firm league of friendships with each other for their common defense, the security of their liberties, and their mutual and general welfare. There was no taxation with the federal government at the time. You say, well, how did they fight? Well, the states would, send some money based on the states, not the individual, but the states were taxed based on their land and would send money whenever they chose to because there was no way to enforce it. They also had to send the soldiers, which they told the federal government to pay for, which the federal government couldn't pay for because they were not being given money by the states like they were supposed to. You wonder why the articles failed. This is why they failed. Article 3, assist each other in case of war. Article 4, Yeah, this is my favorite. Article 4, the better to secure and perpetuate mutual friendships and intercourse among the people of the different states in this union, the free inhabitants of each of these states, paupers, vagabonds, and fugitives from justice excepted, shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of the citizens in the several states. And the people of each state shall have free ingress and regress to and from any other state, and shall enjoy therein all of the privileges of trade and commerce, which subject to the duties and imposition of any restrictions of the state. So, yeah, as long as you had the money, you could get around, which is, I don't know, maybe not too different than what we have now. Wanted to throw some links in the chat for those who come by and watch this show later or are here today. Here is a link to the Articles of Confederation. So you can read them yourself. And then, of course, the extant version of the Constitution. I think this one only has the first 10 amendments. There are 26. And one should know those by, fairly well because we live here. There's that. Now I did a little mind game with myself to try to figure out what would it be like if we had a monocameral society without any kind of significant power, and assuming that the United States today still existed by this time. I have my doubts that we would have survived the War of 1812 had we not had the more powerful federal government. Is that good or bad? It's up to you. The world would be completely different without the United States in it. I'm sorry, nobody can tell me any different. No, we're not perfect. And yes, there is room for improvement. I acknowledge those things. But the world would be a very different place. So let's pretend, for example, that the Articles of Confederation did not get overturned. Let's just say that instead of 9 states that voted for it, there were 8 states that voted for it. Therefore, the Constitution would not have passed. In my imaginings, and these are the deranged imaginings of Gregor H., so take them for what they are worth. The United States only extends the Ohio River and the Appalachian Mountains to the Ozarks. Now the maybe 17 states closely knit and prospering. You see, the Louisiana Purchase was never made. Lewis and Clark never took their trip, were dwarfed to the west by France and to the north by Great Britain. France and Spain are fighting over the desert southwest, and the British are joining the Canadian and the Sino borders. The bridge built across the narrow strait of western Canada to the British Manchuria was swept away by the ice in the 1970s. But it will be on the drawing board for the upcoming 2040s. They're sure it will last this time. The German Weimar Republic never fell because World War II was a draw. Russia is still Tsarist. China is divided into 7 separate countries, 3 of which are members of the British Commonwealth. Steam power is the king of the seas, and His Majesty King Charles rules an empire on which the sun never sets. You can receive a telegram any place on Earth within 7 days. Radio traffic can get your message across the world. Remember, this takes place in 2023. Next week, the VLG, the Very Large Gun, a project of the British Empire in Kenya, is going to try again to launch a projectile into orbit around the Earth. They're still not ready to test with animals yet. The G-force would turn anything alive, including vegetation, into jelly. But they are hopeful that artificial satellites will be able to relay radio traffic so that real-time communication can be had anywhere on the seas or even replace the telegraph. Few land wars occur anymore. The Big Four, Germany, France, and Japan, and Britain have navies that ply the oceans. Trade routes are the order of the day, so naval battles are frequent. However, no war has been declared since the end of the Great War in 1947. Japan's surprise alliance with the Western Axis against the Kaiser German ended the conflict. It does wreak havoc on some of the supplies. This affects most European countries and more, far more than the Americas. The 17 states, cotton and food and arms are still the significant exports of the United States, and the indentured economy of the South was able to thrive. Imported slaves are, of course, prohibited and have been since the 1900s, but felons can be indentured for a term of their sentence of 7 years or more, whichever, for 7 years. I'm sorry. But felons can be indentured for the term of their sentence or 7 years, whichever is greater. Many prisoners chose this as an option because the prison system in the southern states is brutal, with a death rate of some 60% in the first 3 years of your sentence. Locally grown labor in the form of captive families is still traded. Though Britain did give up slavery in their soil, people of various nations are still indentured globally to keep up the production of multiple colonies and Commonwealth members. The semi-automatic pistol was recently invented. A cartridge box of 9 rounds could be exchanged quickly. The Gatling gun with a belt feed was designed in the 1940s during the 4th decade of World War I. That finally allowed the French and British to push the Kaiser back to Alsace and recapture the Lorraine Valley in France. The Smith & Wesson manufacturer of the great state of New York supplied them. Massachusetts to New York is known as the gun belt. If you live in northern United States, odds are you're educated to the 8th grade, work in an industry and a simple work, most likely mining, coal, and mineral mining are the big ones. Hydroelectric power is just starting here in 2023. If you're in the southern states, you are related to crops. Your family is indentured to a landowner, or you're a slave. In either case, you are probably living in a tenement on the farm where you work in some capacity. Some folks in your family may be able to read. That gives you hope. Your boss is the great-grandchild of the person who bought the land, and your family was probably worked on the land for 3 generations. The hard part is keeping the crop rotation up to keep up productivity. Leaving the land fallow like they used to is not an option. But the discovery of high nitrate crude oil could change that. The only fertilizer that is coming out of the south end of a northbound cattle or person. At 65, you'd be considered ancient. You'll most likely be composted when you do pass. The southern states actually pay for bodies to supplement their agriculture. Infection is the most common cause of death, where from a cut or another bout of the flu brought over to some port from who knows where. Technology is barely out of the Victorian level. The Industrial Revolution never really took off. A device called an airplane recently flew almost 400 miles using kerosene and liquefied nitrous oxide. The French aeronaut landed safely, setting a new record in powered flight. It is hoped that some of the crude oil discovered in British Arabia may lead to a more efficient fuel. Diesel is just too cumbersome for aeronautical purposes. Even the hydrogen dirigibles have trouble with the diesel engines. Though when flying with the wind, they can cruise great distances. Navigation of any significant space is still limited to the amount of fuel that can be carried. A tremendous innovation in the United States called a diesel-electric locomotive may revolutionize the Americas. They plan to build trade routes on rails to Mexico City and Buenos Aires, assuming French Louisiana and Spanish Baja can come to terms. That would mean Buenos Aires to New York in just under 7 days, as higher speeds are promised and the track can be laid. That would unite America. Yeah, that's a little bit ridiculous, I'll admit. There's some things that probably may have been discovered anyway, but I'm not sure. A lot of discoveries happened because of need and because of the push and because of the choice to reduce labor. If we didn't have a different document besides the Articles of Confederation, I'm not sure we would have gotten rid of slavery. You have to remember that you needed a unanimous vote of 13 colonies in order to change the document. And so in order to make slavery eventually illegal, you would have had to have the agreement of 13 states. And 4 of those states would never have voted for it because their economy was so based on it. Yes, we wouldn't have had a civil war, but the world would be a very different place. Now, does that mean that I think the Constitution is perfect? No, I don't think it is. I think it's the best thing we currently have. So think about it before you want to abolish something. I really do think that the Constitution is a better option than the Articles of Confederation. It's simple math. You can do it. Being able to make changes, being able to... people talk about the 3/5 clause, they didn't count humans as whole. The entire purpose of that was not to not count humans as whole, was to keep the slave states from being able to overwhelm and control the Constitution. People say that the Constitution was foisted upon the American people. Maybe a little bit of truth to that. I'm not going to argue against it so much as, is that a bad thing, is the next question. Because we managed to, and the current government is abusing its power. But if you look back to the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin decision points out, we have to look at our history to find out what was intended by the founding fathers. And what we have now is not what's intended by our founding fathers. And if we didn't have a legal system, which is what would have been true if we stayed with the Articles of Confederation, and if we didn't have some way to enforce the standards, the national standards known as the Bill of Rights across the country, well, then we probably would still be in the Victorian age. A recent research I've been doing, I did a little research on the annual income from 100 years before Christ. That was during what they called the Pax Romana. That was when the Roman Empire was at its highest. It was very productive. It was used all over the place. And I went through a query for all the years between then and between now, using $1990 adjusted. So even though Pax Romana was, 2,000 plus years ago, we use $1990. And on average, the average Roman citizen, the average income in the world was $1990 US dollars. A few years later, same 400 years later, it went down to $380. In 1600, it was still $450. In 1700, it was $470. In 1800, it went up to almost $800 per person per year annual income globally. Now remember, this is averaged globally. Not everybody made that. Yes, there were rich people. There were disgustingly rich people. But globally, the income was about $1,600. By the end of the 20th century, globally, the average income went from $480 to $6,600 in $1990. That jump is due entirely to the Industrial Revolution. Now, do we need to figure out a way to refuel our cars and do other things? Sure. Do we need to figure out a way to protect our environment? Absolutely. I'm not saying we shouldn't do any of those things, but I'm also indicating that just maybe we shouldn't throw everything we built away in order to do that. And that is what a lot of people are talking about doing. They want to throw everything away. In 2008, George Herbert Walker Bush, or George W. Bush, made a statement that he had to destroy the free market in order to save it. And then they bailed out a bunch of banks. And they said they'd never have to do it again. And here we are in 2023. And they're going to destroy the free market in order to save it again. Still, continue to do so. I don't know, but it's not that I'm terrified. It's just that I think everything we're doing to ourselves is completely avoidable. And I would hope that everybody would take a moment and think about it and relax and take a deep breath and think about what the world would be like if you could just let everybody be you, boo. It's a terrible shame when you try to destroy a country because you think that the other thing that has never been successfully done is better. Well, that's Gregor's fictional story for the... Now, Kaz says, and that was awesome, dude, depending on which, his picture is awesome, dude, as Kaz is apparently his real name is on a phone call. I'm guessing he wants to come play, but he's also not here, so I don't know what to do. I think I'll stop blabbering now because it has been 30 minutes is about as long as I'm willing to blather without any interaction. I'm going to post this plus the little script that I read on gregorh.substack.com. It's free. I don't charge anything for my Substack. I'm just starting out this whole thing of blogging and vlogging. It's a new thing to me. So I will be posting it on there. If you want to interact with me, you can make comments. You can talk to me a little bit. Maybe if it's something you want to talk about, we can see about scheduling something else. A little look at the news is to remind everybody that one of the ex-presidents of the United States was arrested without being handcuffed and without being photographed. I find that fascinating, given that the New York Police Department a few days ago said they would not participate in the arrest of Donald Trump. So I'm wondering if that's why he was not handcuffed. Because you can bet the left really wanted a perp walk. I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm just saying let's wait to the trial. I'm a big fan of the terms let's wait to the trial. I'm not going to jump on anybody's bandwagon and say that, yes, this is true and this is wrong and this is that. I really like to say, wait for the evidence. Do I think he's going to be convicted? No, I really don't. But I don't have all the evidence and there may be something I don't know about. So I'm not going to say that that's exactly what's going to happen. Ukraine is a mess. Our federal government keeps working really hard to get us to go to a war over that, and I'm not sure why. I'm not anti-war in the sense that Neville Chamberlain was. Avoid war at all costs. I think there comes a point when one must stand up and say enough. And I don't agree with Russia for doing what they did, but this is their modus operandi. They've been doing this for decades. Even when they were at the Soviet Union, it was always something along the lines that they did to Crimea and the Ukraine, where they'd send in a bunch of people, cause a bunch of rabble-rousers, claim that territory as their own, and then later go push more. And that is just their modus operandi. It is not new. It is the way they work. The one thing, though, that is different now is that I think they're more dangerous because economically they're more challenged. Years ago, trying to remember exactly which book it was, but Tom Clancy had one of his books. They were talking about a new START negotiations, Strategic Arms Treaty, where they sent inspectors to go look at all the quote bombs that or the missiles that the Soviet Union was willing to dismantle. And it turns out, according to Tom Clancy, and in his imagination, so qualify that the way you'd like, none of the missiles could launch because they hadn't been maintained. And based on what we've seen currently from the current Russian military, maintenance is an issue. Does that mean they don't have nuclear weapons? No. That means if I was one of the guys on their team getting ready to fire a thermonuclear warhead out of a howitzer or whatever their equal, whatever gun they use for low yield in theater nuclear weapons, which is what they're threatening about you putting into the Belarus, then I'd refuse to pull the trigger because you don't know if it's going to go off or not. Nuclear arms are like children. They need to be maintained, and they never grow up. So they're a long and expensive process. Nothing worth having. So anyway, that's my views. Thank you, everybody, for joining. You'll be able to catch this episode reworked a little bit with on Spotify and Apple iTunes. Just look for the Liberty Mindset, episode 14, and I'll upload that there by tomorrow if you want to go listen again. And again, you can check me out. I'll have a Substack up by the end of the day tomorrow, gregorh.substack.com, where you can read my thoughts on this whole process. Really appreciate your time, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And remember, stay curious and seek the truth.